1 minute ago, everything changed inside Tom Oar's old barn loft, shifting from ordinary silence to something that has left the entire town on edge. What unfolded up there, what people found hidden in the darkness, has created a wave of unease that no one can shake off. And before we delve deeper into what was lurking in those shadows above that weathered barn, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because what happened next is something no one has been able to explain. It all began with a quiet morning and a strange stillness lingering around Tom's property. It was the kind of eerie calm that makes people stop mid-step, unsure if the world is holding its breath. Neighbors claimed they saw a faint, wandering light slipping through the cracks of the barn wall, something they had never seen before. And even though no one had spotted Tom stepping outside for days, the more they looked, the more they realized something was amiss. Something felt as if it was waiting. That day began quietly, unlike every previous morning, almost as though the air itself was hiding a secret. The old barn, sitting at the far end of Tom Oar's property, stood still, its wooden walls aged, gray, and worn by time's relentless touch. The doors remained closed, just as they always had been. But something was wrong that morning. Everyone could sense it instinctively. The air hovered heavy and expectant, as though the place itself was holding its breath. Neighbors were the first to notice the difference. Something like a low hum of movement around the barn that hadn't been there before. No one saw Tom come out of the house, and no smoke drifted from the chimney to indicate that he was awake. All anyone saw was a single lantern flickering through a crack in the boards, despite the sun already being high above. By midday, word had already spread around town that something unusual was happening inside that barn. A handful of locals and nearby neighbors, uneasy but guided by curiosity, walked over to check on Tom and see what was going on inside the barn. They were shocked to find that the main gate was unlatched, something Tom never ever did. They also noticed the ground had been disturbed. Several sets of footprints led in and out of the barn, far too many to belong to one person. Someone claimed they heard faint thuds from somewhere inside, as if something heavy was being dragged or lifted. Another insisted that the noises weren't just movement but muffled voices, whispers that were low, slow, and almost deliberate. One of the men called out Tom's name, but there was no response. Eventually, he pushed the door open just a few inches, and a rush of cold, stale air spilled out from inside, carrying with it the scent of old hay mixed with something else, something he couldn't put a name to. Darkness swallowed the barn's interior, thick and heavy, almost alive in its intensity. The lantern's flicker inside danced once more, then vanished completely. They stepped back from the entrance, unsure of what to do next. No one wanted to step into Tom's barn without permission. He was known to be extremely private, almost secretive about that space. But whatever was in that barn now felt different. It didn't feel like a simple storage place for tools or saddles anymore. It felt like something had shifted beneath it, like the very ground had become unsettled. By nightfall, whispers had turned into rumors. Some people said Tom had uncovered something buried in the loft, while others swore they saw movement through the slits in the barn wall, a slow, deliberate pacing of a figure back and forth. The unease grew faster than anyone expected, spreading through the town until curiosity began to outweigh fear. And as darkness swallowed the fields surrounding Tom's property, one chilling question lingered in the cold air. What exactly was happening inside Tom's barn, and why had no one seen him come out again? When the next morning arrived, the barn stood untouched, as if frozen in time. The air was still, the fields empty, and even the animals kept their distance. The group of neighbors who had gathered the previous day did not return, yet their unease remained like a lingering chill. The barn door, which had been slightly open the night before, was now firmly shut again, and no one knew who had closed it. There were no signs of movement inside. No footprints in the dirt. No sounds. No smoke coming from Tom's house. His truck sat in the exact same place. Half covered in leaves and a thin layer of dust. One man reported that he'd knocked on Tom's door that morning, but received no answer. He added that the knock echoed strangely long, as if the walls were hollow, and when he called out Tom's name, the only response came from the wind whispering past the barn hinges. By midday, the quiet began to feel wrong, unnatural, and a few people returned to the property, pulled there by a stillness they couldn't explain. They spoke quietly among themselves, their eyes drifting to the loft window above the barn. Just a small square opening draped in cobwebs. Behind that window, something dark shifted. They couldn't tell if it was a shadow or someone standing there. But the longer they stared, the more certain they became that something was up there, watching them. They waited for hours, expecting Tom to emerge and explain everything. But no one came. The sun began to set, and still there was no sound from inside. Not even a whisper of wind through the trees. The whole place felt like it had slipped out of rhythm with the world. Too silent, too still, too heavy. That night, a few men returned with lanterns and stood outside the barn. They didn't dare go in, but they listened. At first, they heard nothing. The world seemed muted. Then from above came a faint dragging sound, slow, deliberate, as if something was being pulled across the loft floor. The men stopped breathing. The sound ceased the moment one of them stepped forward, and the dry dirt crunched beneath his boot. They turned to leave, but one man swore he heard a whisper from behind the barn door, a tired, low voice speaking a single word, "Don't." But that one word stayed with them through the night, echoing in the heavy silence, a reminder that something was inside that loft. Something that absolutely did not want to be disturbed. The following evening, the silence broke, but not in the way anyone expected. It happened shortly after sunset, when two locals, driven by a curiosity that had grown beyond reason, decided to approach the barn again. They carried a lantern and the kind of uneasy courage that comes when fear twists itself into obsession. The air was damp and smelled of rain. As they neared the barn door, the old wooden planks creaked beneath their boots, echoing into the stillness like a warning. They listened carefully for any sign of life. At first, all they could hear was the faint rustle of dry hay through the cracks. Then came a sound, soft, but unmistakably the slow, rhythmic creak of footsteps overhead. Someone, or something, was pacing across the loft floor. They exchanged a look, both hesitant and terrified. One whispered that maybe Tom had finally returned, but neither dared call out his name. The steps continued, each one followed by a brief pause and the strange creaking of old boards. Then silence fell again, an even deeper silence than before. They held their breath. Then came another soft sound, the shuffle of boots across straw. The lantern flickered and specks of dust drifted down from the loft beams. Floating through the thin beam of light, something was moving up there. One of the men, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears, lifted the lantern higher toward the loft. The glow caught something, a shape. Not clear, but enough to make his breath stop. He stumbled backward. The other man asked what he saw, but he couldn't answer. He adjusted his angle, trying to get a clearer view, but the loft was too dark to see a face. Still, he knew something was there, something standing motionless in the far corner. When his hand trembled, the lantern light shook, and at that moment, the figure shifted, then vanished into the shadows, as though it had melted into the wall itself. Silence swallowed the barn again. The rafters creaked softly as they adjusted to the cool night air. The men backed away slowly, refusing to turn their backs to the loft. The air had grown colder, as if something inside the barn had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. When they finally reached the gate, one man glanced back, only to see a faint glow through the loft window. A lantern was moving inside, slowly, back and forth. And he knew for certain that no one living had entered that barn in days. Everyone in the small Montana town knew one rule about Tom's place. No one went near the loft. Not friends, not neighbors, not even family. 0. Those who had been inside said Tom never talked about what he kept up there, and if anyone asked, he would simply shake his head and change the subject. So when those two men claimed they saw a figure and a moving lantern inside, it wasn't just strange, it was impossible. By the next morning, a tense, hushed atmosphere settled over the property. More people gathered near the fence, drawn by the whispers sweeping through the town. They stood in groups, speaking softly while watching the barn like it might move on its own. The loft window appeared the same, a dusty, cobweb-covered square, but several people insisted they saw something inside. One said it looked like a faint handprint pressed against the glass. Another claimed the torn curtains had shifted slightly, as if someone brushed past them. The sheriff was eventually called. He arrived reluctantly. He never liked getting involved with Tom's business. But when a man goes missing and eerie sounds echo from his barn, even silence becomes suspicious. He entered the barn first. His flashlight cut through the darkness in a smooth arc. Dust stirred with each step he took. The beam revealed tools, saddles, and the outline of a ladder leading to the loft. The ladder seemed older than the barn itself. Its rungs darkened with age and something unidentifiable. The sheriff called out Tom's name. No answer. Only the faint sway of the ladder, touched by the shifting light. For a moment, the silence felt alive, as if the walls were listening. Then a single sharp sound broke it, a creak from above. Not the ladder. A footstep. He froze, light aimed upward. Dust drifted down, settling onto his shoulders. Another sound followed, slower this time, moving across the loft. The sheriff waited, breath held, heart tight, for whatever was up there to finally reveal itself. One hand rested firmly on the worn ladder, and his lantern cast a trembling beam upward, as if searching for the very source of the darkness itself. From somewhere above, something small slipped out of the shadows and fell. It wasn't large, yet it was enough to make him flinch hard. The object struck the ground beside his boot with a hollow, unsettling thud. When he leaned closer with the lantern raised, he realized it was a rope, frayed, knotted at one end, and disturbingly warm to the touch, as though someone had held it just moments earlier. The sheriff's face drained of color. He stepped back, whispered something too soft for anyone else to catch, then exited the barn. Before shutting the door behind him, he repeated the same warning Tom had always given. Don't go up there. For 2 entire days, not a single resident approached the barn. Comportant and to breathe ... Casting one hand on the worn ladder, and his lantern cast a trembling beam upward, as if searching for the very source of the darkness itself. From somewhere above, something small slipped out of the shadows and fell. It wasn't large, yet it was enough to make him flinch hard. The object struck the ground beside his boot. With a hollow, the sheriff's warning clung to their minds, but so did the haunting image of that old, knotted rope that had somehow fallen from above while still holding warmth. Nothing about that moment made sense. Yet, curiosity has a way of wearing down even the most cautious souls. By the third night, under a dull gray sky, heavy with the promise of rain, one man finally decided he needed to see the loft for himself. He came alone, armed only with a small lantern whose weak glow barely cut through the thick dust swirling in the stale air. The barn doors moaned softly when he pushed them open, and every sound echoed too loudly in the suffocating silence. The hinges groaning, his boots creaking, even the faint flap of something loose overhead. He called out quietly, hoping there would be no reply. And luckily, none came. Only the hollow echo of his voice drifted back to him. The ladder stood where it always had, leaning into the shadows above. After a brief hesitation, he began to climb. Each rung felt brittle beneath his weight, and with every step, a coldness seemed to seep deeper into the air around him. Dust drifted down from the boards overhead, settling on his hands and clinging to his jacket. When he reached the top, he lifted the lantern and froze. The floor was covered with decades of dust, thick enough to swallow the sound of his steps. Yet something about the scene was wrong. Near the center of the loft was a trail, prints, fresh, sharp, and leading toward the far wall. He climbed fully onto the loft and followed them, his breath shallow, the lantern trembling in his hand. The prints stopped near a stack of hay bales piled unevenly against the boards. One bale in particular seemed recently moved. The dust around it was disturbed in a way that stood out. He pushed the bale aside, and the smell hit him instantly. Sharp, earthy, almost metallic. Behind it lay a small wooden hatch built into the floor. The edges bore marks from hand tools, signs that it had been opened and closed many times. His hand shook violently as he reached for the latch. It gave way too easily, so easily it felt like it had been waiting for him. The hatch lifted, and a wave of cold air surged upward, thick with the scent of damp wood and something ancient, something deeper. The lantern flickered as its light touched what lay below, a narrow space carved into the earth beneath the loft. Something faintly glinted in the darkness. Before he could take a better look, the lantern dimmed suddenly. Then came a sound behind him, a slow, deliberate creak, exactly like the one he had heard before. He spun around, the lantern flaring weakly, but saw nothing. Only dust drifting, where something might have stood moments earlier. Then the hatch slammed shut on its own, so forcefully the entire loft floor shook. He stumbled backward, raced down the ladder, dropped the lantern, and fled into the night without daring to look back. By sunrise, he told everyone what he had seen in the loft. And once the story of the hidden hatch spread through the town, the barn could no longer be ignored. The sheriff attempted to keep people away, but fear, mixed with the desire to know the truth, created a tension no warning could settle. By first light, a small group gathered with ropes, lanterns, and the stubborn determination born from too many unanswered questions. No one wanted to climb the ladder alone, so they entered together, moving cautiously through the cold barn. Dust floated lazily through the slivers of morning light. The ladder stood unchanged, just as the sheriff had described. One man tested the first rung. It held, so one by one, they climbed. When the last man stepped onto the loft, the only sounds were their breathing and the faint crackle of shifting hay beneath their boots. They spread out with their lanterns, searching the floor for any sign of the hatch the night visitor swore he had seen. At first, there was only dust, thick and ancient. Then someone noticed a faint square of floor where the dust was thinner, brushed aside as if recently uncovered. He knelt and tapped the boards. A hollow sound echoed beneath them. Every man froze. Together, they worked their fingers into the cracks, prying the boards loose. When the hatch finally lifted, a cold breath of air rushed upward, and their lanterns flickered. Beneath them was a narrow pit carved with care, almost lovingly, as if someone had shaped it over years. It went far deeper than they expected. At the bottom, he brushed away dirt around the wrapped object and found it heavier than expected. When the rope was lowered again, he tied the object on, and the men above hauled it back up. The cloth was tightly bound, knotted to keep whatever lay inside from shifting. With trembling hands, one man loosened the first knot. The cloth fell open. The object was small, worn, ancient-looking, its surface marked by something none of them could name. Before anyone could speak, a dull thud reverberated from below, a single firm knock beneath the hatch, a reminder that whatever they had lifted from the pit was not meant to leave it. They backed away, gripping their lanterns. The loft quieted again, but none of them felt safe. Not with the object lying before them. Not with the pit exhaling cold air that refused to stop. The lanterns trembled in their hands, shadows leaping wildly across the loft.